Good evening, and welcome to the Dusty Feet. And as you can tell by the date, it's the 16th, and we're going to continue our discussion with Jim Wern on our Follow the Red String series, Disciple, Follower, and we're kind of walking through these. We got a part 3. We'll see if we'd get through or whether we need to have one more. There'll be limitations past that, so that'll probably be the most we're going to see at this point with this series. And we're going to talk about that as we move through the podcast. So, website again has all the videos, all our priors, and the series that we're in. Red String homework series will start back up. Of course, we're on there, and then Twitter to get your updates. So we'll make sure updates are out where they need to be. I wanted to start off before we dive in with Jim. That we're right in the middle, actually, of the fall feasts. Okay, and you go, what are the fall feasts. Does that mean they're spring feasts? Yes, they're spring feasts. And so let's take a quick peek just to remind us of where we're at, right? So the 7 feasts, and these are where Jesus or Yeshua is reflected in them. When you look through these feasts that God set up, and you read Leviticus chapter 23 will give the vast breakout of each of these. You'll get a nice timing, days of the month, all those kind of pieces. Passover, we all know the Passover story, and that's in Exodus. We know this. We have Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of First Fruits, and the Feast of Weeks. You're going to see, if you look into those, and I encourage you to do that, you'll see Jesus in his first coming, meaning when he came, you're going to see it there. And if you look in those feasts, you're going to go, wow, that's where we see Jesus. It's very cool. He's so reflected, isn't even funny. And then in the fall, we have the fall feasts. The months you see are on the Jewish calendar because that's how they work, and that's how God broke it out. God broke this one out on the Jewish calendar, so you just kind of go along with that. Gregorian doesn't fit in this. So today is the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, and it ended at sunset. Okay, I'm East Coast. Jimmy's on West Coast, so it's not there yet. And this is the Day of Atonement. Each feast season, as I call it, the seasons of, right? The spring feasts and the fall feasts, each seems to have a very somber day. And I'd say Passover would be the one there. And on this end, it is the most somber day with the Day of Atonement. This reflects in this will be Jesus' second coming. So the Feast of Trumpets would be his return. Day of Atonement and the Feast of Tabernacles or Sukkot, which starts next week, goes into the millennial reign. And we'll see how that goes. I share that because I want you to go dig in and read and learn something about these feasts. Because go read the inclusion timeframes on these. You'll get an idea of how important these dates are. And if you're going to see Jesus reflected in them, all it does is just add credence to God's fingerprint on everything, yeah. And it's so today's Day of Atonement, very somber day where you're realizing where you've wronged God and wronged others, and sometimes in these there's sacrifices given during these time frames, and for those intentional deals they have the things, but there are sacrifices for unintentional sin. If you feel that you've done something wrong to brother, and there's these things because you weren't either one, you're unaware of it, and that's where you look back and you say, God, look, I know I've crossed somebody somewhere, and I can't do anything, and God help make that right, okay, and you do that. Other ones we have the opportunity to do that. For me in particular, one of these reflective points for me for this Day of Atonement was with my wife. I had, there are times where we talk and we do things, and my interaction is off-putting to her. And she takes it. My intention isn't to do that. However, I need to be better at reviewing my intention. And like we're going to talk about on these reflective points with discipleship, that what we do and our intention to do and how it's executed is important. And I often will hurt her feelings, and I need to be more, one, aware of it, and two, as Jimmy used the word last week, responsive to it. I need to be more responsive. I need to be more aware. And then I need to not wait till one time a year to say so. I need to go and say, I'm sorry. I apologize. I was wrong. And the point that I'm making or have made, that's not the point. If it's not received in love or with care or concern, then it makes me wrong in how I put that out. And I think it's important in our discipleship walk as well. So it was one of those things, those reflective points in this particular season, but in this Day of Atonement, when you're doing this, you're trying to get yourself right with God and our community, right? Your brother. And what do we do to not do that? So I encourage you to dig in to the feast, read, especially we're in this fall season. So go back and take a look at them and realize Sukkot's coming up next week. And that's a wonderful feast. And we're going to get a chance to enjoy some time together in our temporary dwellings and just have a great time. I'm going to go up and hang out with the guys at the Vine. That means we won't be here next week. There's no Dusty next week because Sukkot. We'll be at Sukkot. So I'm excited about that. I think it'll be fun. So we'll take a time off. And as always on the Dusty Feet, this is a place where we can safely explore the endless ways of God, interconnection of His creation, where belief understandings may be challenged, divine misunderstandings may exist, and traditional teachings might falter as we pursue connection, context, and community with God and each other here in an environment of grace and love. So here we go on Follow the Red String. And there we go.
Howdy, howdy.
What's up?
Oh, not much. Life, it just all kinds of stuff going on.
There you
go. We didn't talk before the broadcast. I just thought of it about the upcoming NASCAR event. We'll have to do that later.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, we do. For those, if you don't know us, we'll introduce you to that other sidebar of us on this deal is that our family is very much, we just enjoy our NASCAR. So, for those that have their football fiends or baseball fiends or basketball fiends or something, who knows, archery, whatever. And we just like our NASCAR. So
that's our sport. A lot of people don't consider it a sport, but it is.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So there you go. Let's get the sad news out of the way, because that way we can do this and go on, is that before we get into the deep stuff, because we don't want to roll over at the end, is that Jimmy is going to take a course. So explain briefly what you're going to do with the course, but the fact that you're going to be absent starting October. So
after I finished my bachelor's and master's degree, I swore I would never go back to school. And I didn't tell you this, Bob. Last week, I registered for community college because I wanted to take, they've got a culinary school there, and I'm going to go, do some, I think I did mention that to you.
Yeah, you mentioned, you said you were going to do it.
Right. I registered for it, and I was ready to sign up for my first class, and then this other
How not to cut your fingers off.
Yeah, exactly.
101.
It is food safety and handling. So,
again, top of the list.
Absolutely. So I'm putting that on hold, unfortunately, as much as I don't want to do it. But I've got an opportunity to be part of a pilot program for a new course that they're going to be starting at Azusa Pacific University for basically life coach. And so I'll be able to take this course, and at the end of it, having to take the test for ICF certification for being a life coach. So looking forward to that. It's going to be both academic and practical. But lots of hours of work. And unfortunately, the classes are on Thursday nights. So it's going to impede our ability to do this stuff. But we talked about Renew, and hopefully we'll get a chance to do that.
Like I say, that pushed us. So you've heard us mention before in other ones that we want to do a series on Renew. So maybe this is the little nudge that we needed to say, okay, because we want to do that separate from these red string, because red string has this point. Renew is going to have its focus too. And then I've got joyful noise I want to bring back up. There's some Aleph Beta stuff I want to go over. There's all kinds of things that are going on. So we can work through all of that. So you'll be gone. There's one other week you'll be available, and that would be the week after Sukkot, maybe.
Right.
But then gone for 4 months. So that said, beware, we're not losing Jimmy, we're just losing Jim. So, and then he'll come back and maybe share some of that stuff while we grab on. And trust me, there'll be topics we'll bring it up, go, okay, we're going to put that on our dusty string, our follow the red string, Dusty Feet bucket list of things we want to talk about, right? And do that. So, so that said, so what's you've got, we were talking about, and we mentioned Joe and getting Joe to do and talk about responsiveness. So Joe Christmas tonight is, like I said, we've just closed Day of Atonement, right? And so traditionally, which is nice, after it's a tradition to fast during this time.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's because if you read, it says afflict yourselves. And there's a big, broad discussion on what afflict yourselves means. Jim and I were talking about that goes back, you go back to Catholic days and guys literally beat themselves. You know, we have this whole thing going on. So, and then what does that mean in this? And so traditionally it's brought up in a fast, which is fine. It's more about being more introspective to yourself and really putting yourself under the microscope and look down and see. That's worse than hitting yourself. Sometimes you really think about it. You put yourself under the microscope, you're going to end up punching yourself, you know, in the gut, you know, with something with that. So, but then you break the fast. And so they're feasting at the vine right now with this, and Joe's with that. So that's killer and awesome that they're doing that. So that's why Joey's not here. But Joey, I think we might record that and then we'll post it so you'll get Joey's intake on this responsiveness, because this is a good life example, experience, testimony that Joe has on being responsive to God, hearing Him, and then do. And because there are a couple points where he said, okay, are you sure it's you? And then something else will happen. And said, okay, God, that was you. And how that plays out. So we'll get Joey later. So that said, since we don't have Joe, which is fine. So continue.
Well, and it's interesting when you said that, because, and I'm anxious to hear Joe's testimony in that, and, you know, kind of how he progressed through it. And I think it was mom or dad. I can't remember who was it that we were doing that little texting afterward. And somebody brought up Jonah.
It was me.
And, was it you?
I brought up Jonah. Yeah.
Okay.
In this particular one with Day of Atonement, and the Jews read Jonah during this time frame, and why? And the Aleph Beta that goes with that. We'll talk about that later. But there's an Aleph Beta series that he has. I'll put that link in the description. I will add that, the Jonah series, because the link. No, I think I might have already put it there. That link to that series. Okay. So if you can't see the series because free, you can only watch so many minutes of it. However, if you want to see the series, let me know, because I have an educator's account with Aleph Beta. I'll make you a student. That's all. And all I do is put your email in. That's all I do. And then you'll get an email. You'll set up your account. That's it. Okay. Cool. And then you can go in and watch the videos, and then you get full length because you're a student, because this is what we're studying. And that was the whole point. But then you can watch the series, because it's not just one video. It's a series of, what are they? Probably between 5 to 7 minute videos in a series of stuff. But it really breaks down, because Jonah is your almost your anti-prophet. In other words, he doesn't want to do what he's been in the business of doing and called to do. Right. And then we talk about this from the discipleship standpoint. What's it going to take to get you through being one. So that's another point. Bring that. So go on. What are you saying about Jonah?
Well, and it's a valid point, to say a disciple is someone who's responsive to God, and here's Jonah, who was like you said, the anti-prophet. He was the opposite. He was responding. He was just responding in a negative rather than a positive.
Yeah. I prefer not to get involved, God,
Yes.
for, and we would argue his own selfish reasons.
Right. And he gave
That's
an
funny.
answer.
So did Paul.
Right. Well, and
Peter and yada yada. So,
and that's really the point: is there is no perfect disciple. There is no perfect model other than Christ.
right.
Christ being the only one
Right.
Who modeled discipleship because he followed the Father
Right.
to perfection, and none of the
Right.
disciples of Jesus lived up to his standard.
Right.
And obviously the predecessors, the prophets, had their issues. And you can see everybody, myself included, we're in this imperfect mold. And so, it begs the question, to what degree, is it, what I've heard is over the course of your life, it's even if you took 3 forward and 2 back, steps, 3 steps forward,
Right.
2 steps back,
Right.
you're still generally moving in a direction toward God.
Right.
We have seasons where we struggle, wrestle, whatever, even rebel, as we've seen
Yeah.
with both New and Old Testament, and then return back to God. It's somebody who is progressively moving toward God. That's what I think we're talking about and looking at.
Endurance.
Maybe that's a good one. I've really been wrestling with this week, on 2 levels. One, and it goes back to some of the stuff you and I were talking about before, and I think it warrants valid study, is because we look at the modern version of what we talk about in terms of discipleship, and it tends to be a program in a church where you're supposed to do this, and this. And,
Right.
I literally, just before the broadcast, I pulled up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lists off the internet of qualities or characteristics of a disciple. And one of them was so church. They go to church, they serve in the church, they give to the church, they invite people to the church. And it's like, interesting. Who is this discipleship benefiting, God or you?
That's there you go.
And they weren't necessarily bad qualities. Yes, we are to be generous. Yes, we are to be,
Right.
involving other people. Yes, we are to be committed to the body of Christ. All those things are good things. But some of the lists were a little vague and they weren't really helpful. Some of the lists were legalistic. And in that sense can be both limiting, but also, when you get to the point where you've programmed it, it now becomes something where it's a set of behaviors that you could easily set up and do, but not really have the heart for what God is calling us, who God is calling us to. So it's been tough to just go, oh, it's this or this or this. No. So and then the other aspect of it that I was wrestling with is discipleship singular or corporate?
Now you've asked, in my opinion, that is the mature question. In other words, we talk about, remember, maturity is where we're going and we're getting outside ourselves and doing this. We realize that or maybe ask the question, what is the corporate element of discipleship? Okay. And so I'm going to dab my foot back in the Old Testament, okay, and say, when the children are told what to do, the responses and the behavior that God is expecting is twofold. It is individual and it's corporate, okay? And what they end up getting, follow me on this because this is going to make it really uncomfortable really fast. The room's going to get warmer quicker. They get punished for the corporate behavior.
Yep.
Okay? The individual behavior, because just like now, I don't feel that nobody is doing anything right,
Right.
And at that point, back in the land, there were people that were like for instance, when the original 12 spies, right? And they get back up and they go, look at this point. There's a guy in the back going, what are y'all, stupid? We're going in the land. And the guys in front are going, no, we don't want to go. It's like you're hitting Larry in the back. What do you mean we're not going? And so majority rules, right? And they don't. And so corporate behavior ends up, that's not 100%, but you're with that, okay? So God does have an expectation of individual and corporate. What we have in our Christian doctrine is eliminate a lot of that corporate scenario, and we don't account for it, which is even worse. That we don't account for it, and I think on the individual, I think we still have that skewed as well. But now you're asking a good question, because now that discipleship has a strong corporate element. Yes.
And what did you say? You are my disciples if you what? Love one another.
Which means you have to have
community.
Yeah.
You have to have that connection. Yeah. And he calls them disciples in a plural, and the response is that they act in a plural, in a plurality of love toward each other. Yeah. Not just one of them love everybody,
right?
But everybody love each other.
Yeah. It's like the three guys. You guys are responsible for loving. The rest of us in the background, we'll just do our thing. Yeah. Yeah. Count the money, do the deal, whatever to do. Yeah.
And it's tough because we don't. In the New Testament, there seems to be that loss of the sense of corporate, and it's true on both sides. One guy sinned in the Old Testament, and the whole nation suffered for it. But also, when one was obedient, the whole nation was blessed for it.
It does go both ways, doesn't it? Yes.
Yeah, it does.
Oh, yeah.
And when the group as a whole rebelled, the group got disciplined.
Yeah.
And when the group confessed and repented, the group was blessed. And God gave forgiveness.
Nineveh is a classic example of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. And you have both intertwined.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I think they're inseparable. In other words, they're not just connected. In my opinion, you can't disconnect them. And when you do that, you're not telling the whole story. You're doing, for lack of a better term, I'm going to use the phrase, you're doing the gospel injustice. You're God's story, and you're breaking it apart.
Yeah. And here's to me a modern example of, and God looks at this too in terms of responsibility. We have both an individual responsibility and a corporate responsibility. I heard recently of a friend of mine who's got a ministry to help churches go through difficult times, and there was a pastor who fell morally, and so now they're dealing with it. And it's so easy to look at that pastor and say, shame on you. Right. There's part of me that looks at that church and says, shame on you.
Yeah.
Shame on me.
Yeah.
If I'm part of that community, that I have not, that I've allowed an unhealthy environment for a pastor to move in that direction. Right. It should never get to that.
Right.
And so there is that part of, then I go with discipleship. There is both the individual, what do I do in response to who God is and those around me? But then corporately, we understand, and we go back to what the New Testament talks about the body of Christ, is that it's kind of like, what do they say? It takes what to raise a child? It takes a village, right? Mm-hmm. I did a quick word search. Here's an interesting eye-opener for me. New Testament, the word disciple. How many times does it come up? Quite a few. What was interesting, Matthew's got it 50 times, Mark 48, Luke, John, Acts, 87. It stops in Acts. There is no mention of the word disciple in any of the epistles. None. So what does that say then about our emphasis on disciple? Now, what are we called in the epistles? Child of God, beloved, friend. Those are the terms God uses. And so I have to, the reason I'm wrestling with all this, and I'm sorry I'm talking so much, and I'll stop.
No. You're spot on. Keep going.
The team that I'm on with Via Cordis, we're getting together in 2 weeks, and we're going to be talking about creating some content on disciple making. And I've really been wrestling with what is it that we're going to teach, and we firmly believe it's not a program. We firmly believe it's not a 5 things and that's it.
Yeah.
That it is messy, and that it is more focused on character-based things, not necessarily on just behaviors, but behaviors are definitely a part of it because that's
Right.
an evidence of what's going on inside.
Right.
But in all of it, we use the term disciple and disciple making. And I think sometimes that can be very, shaming isn't the right word, but I think as a believer, we kind of feel like we're supposed to be constantly sharing Christ and having people receive Jesus. And if we're not doing that, then we're doing something wrong. We're not doing enough.
Right. And you go,
Yeah. And
but scriptures don't play out to that. In other words, we've created doctrine for that,
exactly.
but how it's played out. Yeah.
Now, does that mean that I should never be sharing my faith? No, because my life should be an open book to people to see who I am as a God follower. And it shouldn't just be, well, they should see it by just the way I act. No, I should also be verbalizing it as well.
Okay, but you mentioned something that I liked, and you said open book. Mm-hmm. Okay, and I like the analogy. So let's roll with that a little bit, which means let's talk book, meaning from a physical, visceral standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the book is open; it's sitting there, and the story is there to be told, and you can turn the pages. Mm-hmm. You have to go read the book.
Yeah.
Okay, and with that, you won't get the whole story if you don't. If you read the last 3 pages of War and Peace, you don't get to know what happened in War and Peace. Mm-hmm. It doesn't work that way. Nor does it if you read the first 3 lines. Was the best of time, was the worst of times, blah, blah, blah. And you go, well, then we know what this is about. Then you haven't read War and Peace. That learning the story is just like you don't read the creation story and you don't read Revelation and go, now I understand Scripture. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
It's in the entire piece. So you're open book. Now, I don't think we're meant to be speakers. I think we're meant to be books.
Yeah.
And hear that on that. So my life should be the example. The point is, can you ask? And I have this running discussion with a friend of mine, and we bounce back and forth and agree to disagree on this, is that I think your life should bear witness to questions. Okay. Which, you brought the point about disciples and why some terminology might not be rolled over to the deal. So part of that is the timing and when things came out, the books came out.
Right.
Okay. But you also to understand that, like, for instance, the first book written, meaning the first, from what we understand from the documents that we have and going back to the history, the first things written is the letters to the Corinthians. Paul is already on the scene and doing before quote unquote the gospel accounts even get around. So all you have is the story, the life lessons, the life people, the life stories. Paul spends his time, and Peter do the same deal. They had with their groups and doing this. Is that question that you have is teaching them what to do. What the Jews would call the halakha, the daily walk. Okay, what is your walk? And so then there'd be a question that would come up, and Paul would address it to the community. Actually, those aren't to the church in Corinth. That's not it. They're the letters to the community in so-and-so. Okay? And that community happens to be Jewish communities. Sorry, hate to tell you this. They are. And the letters to them. And they're addressing specific problems in those communities, in their location, in that time and space. We're getting an example of those. We say, okay, how would that apply to us? I'm not looking to lay it over and say, this is the answer to my question. It's not. I need to say, okay, gleaning from this, just like I do the instructions from the Tanakh, is that how does this affect my daily walk as a follower of Jesus? Because we're post Jesus, right? So we can, as much as I push to remember the context and roll back and remember that, I'm also keenly aware that we are post Jesus.
Yeah.
So there's not different, more, as in additional. There's additional things. Jesus come up on the scene and said, now we're talking more mature. I've taught you the ABCs, 1, 2, 3s. We've gone through our things. I've given you examples. We've had nations rise and fall. We've had the Israel split, brought back, split. We have all this going on to teach you from me on. It's not going to get better. How are you supposed to walk it? And how are you supposed to be different? And then when you're different, the questions get asked. Yeah? Because if you're not different from the rest, nobody's asking questions. All you're doing is preaching the same thing. It says you're doing the same thing I'm doing. So I'm happy you're doing what I get to do and not have to worry about that Sunday thing. I get to sleep in. If you're a Sunday churchgoer, I'm a Saturday guy. So my Shabbat for me is then. So choice is, again, still what is different in our lives. And if it's not any different, it doesn't do us any good. And so then we become hypocrites. And what was Jesus' number one problem? His personal number one problem was the hypocrites from the leadership. Okay, that's why they weren't disciples, because the hypocrites, they drove them absolutely nuts. We have somebody that didn't, though, right? Nicodemus. And he was the beginning of many Pharisees past that point. History bears that out. But of not everybody bit. There was a Pharisee that said, and what did he do? He went and asked questions. He went and asked questions. And I think our lives are supposed to be that way. So I agree with you that we do that, but I think that it should bear questions.
Yes.
And two things like, why do you do, as in, it's like, for instance, feasts, right? Or why don't you do, as in, I go to a place and I say, I don't do pork. Okay. And then you don't care. You don't ask me. I don't care. Meaning I'm not there looking for you to ask me. I'm just doing this because God said this is the scoop. If you go to ask me, then it's not, because then we would get in that preachy, well, you should be doing. No. This is why I feel led to do this. And then we talk. And then we go out. And if you want to do it, we sit across the table and you're having that and I'm having this. We're fine. We're fine. And that's funny. Paul talks about the same thing. Okay. And we can do this as we grow and mature. So I think your question, your point on the open book scenario is great. That's why I like the picture it drew, the analogy of you're being there and you're open for everybody to see.
Well, and it points back to, actually, I remember when I was a children's pastor, or as I like to call it back then, I was a pastor of children's ministers, because it was all these people who were connecting with the children. It was such a big program. There's no way I could be the pastor of all those children, but each of them was hopefully, doing something. And my favorite passage was Deuteronomy 6. When it talks about, God talks about, take the law and strap it to your arm, strap it to your forehead. And when you're going along the way and you're talking about it, your kids are going to ask the question, why do we do this? So you're living a distinctive life, different from the culture that you're in. And they're saying, okay, now they all do that, but you do this. Why do you do this? And that's when you begin to tell the story of God's redemption.
And it tells itself, it should tell itself through my life, including the redemption part, which we so desperately need. But in that's exactly the point. And you say, it is part of your everyday activity. And then, like you said, and so the feasts and for instance, Torah study. So meaning that it's laid out. They actually read the first 5 books every year. There's a schedule for that, right? And so you're constantly, every year, you're being re-reminded of what to pay attention to, re-reminded something, oh, I forgot about that, or I wasn't thinking about that, or how many times have we read a scripture and then years later we read it again and go,
Yeah.
I never saw that.
Yeah.
You expand. For instance, there's the verse, and then you take the time to read the chapter, and then in context to the book that's written, and then you go, yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay, here's something to think about, and it was just mulling over in my head. And we're talking about follower versus disciple. And when I look at how Jesus referred to his followers and disciples, and he says, "You are my disciple if you do this, this, and this." But then when we see Paul talking to the church, and the body of Christ, he doesn't talk about them as disciples. He talks about them as children, as family, as body parts. Is it possible that even the next iteration, the next evolution, beyond disciple is child?
Well,
A more intimate degree is my thought. Because
you're always going to have children, are you not, though? Meaning, theoretically speaking, you're always going to start out as a child. Now, that is irrespectful of our age, meaning in our physical lives are proof that this is how it goes. So God builds in the system, the picture, so you can't forget the picture. Okay? You can screw up the order you're supposed to do things or try to skip things, and Mom would know best on this one, is the psychology of you're supposed to go through certain developmental steps. And if you skip it, you're gonna have issues the rest of your life because you skipped a developmental stage, right? You can be old, you're still gonna skip it, and it's gonna mess you up because you missed a developmental stage. So in that discipleship point that we're doing that, he's talking about these things. Now, the body that understand, this is, like you said, the corporate. He's drawing a picture because he's talking about what's hot at the time. And right there, they're talking about bodies. They're starting to understand science a little more, starting to do these kind of things. So the human body is a very visceral picture at that time for them. This is the Greek culture. This is the culture that they're in. So it becomes a practical analogy for them to use. And they say, okay, I'm going to do this. That we have this point that, like Jews and Christians. And I go, it bothers me because we're one body, okay? And in the early beginning, everybody's the same. And they fought, Peter, Paul, these guys fought to try to get these guys together. They died, and we know from history it didn't go so well.
Yeah.
Okay? And so then we have splits, we have things, and we have the infamous us and thems. I literally just watched a video clip earlier today on this guy, just give a breakdown of the top, he said 50 Protestant denominations, and he just did bullet points on them, and this 50, and you're like,
wow.
Like you're saying, what the list, like you said, you're like, is that even biblical? Is that, and the blah, 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 and you're just like, oh my gosh, and you would say, as much as Paul and Peter were not into themselves, I'm going to throw this term out loosely, they're rolling over in their graves on being St. Peter's Cathedral, Paul's Basilica, that they say, you don't get it. That's not, you've missed it. If you're busy doing that, you've missed it. And in this point of the discipleship part in this deal, that the analogies might shift at that point. In other words, I'm agreeing with you on this, that the analogy side is a flow of things. Just like the some of the titles of clan leadership, bishops and pastors. The Jewish culture has those same clan leadership pieces, but being scattered, they were like, what do we do? Because we're not in our clans. We're not in the land. We're not in the clans. And he said, okay, this is the structure I want you to have. And Paul's reminding them of going to do that. Then the words, because the language is now not Hebrew that's being shared out, it's going to eventually throw itself into Greek. So these Greek terms are going to get used, and that's why we throw them out. We have to know what they were built off of. You need to go back to the first half of the book to find out what those are built off of. And then you get a better glimpse of doing that. Just like what does a God follower look like? Go back to the first half of the book, and you're going to find out what a child of God looks like, because God called them children of God.
Exactly.
Which is interesting, not to be that. Why did they get called that in the? And you asked, very good point, Jimmy.
Well, there is a distinction, because there's, if you go back to our absolute purest identity of who we are, children of God is probably a better identifier than disciple of God in terms of how he sees us.
How he sees us.
How he sees us.
Yeah.
Disciple is maybe where one is maybe more relational, the other one might be more functional in terms of how we operate for. You and I talked about intent, commitment, kind of thing. Those who are more committed to following Christ were disciples.
And they're going to have they're going to have a function within the body, a function within the body to keep the body going a direction. Right. And in that, what it's leadership, who are the eyes or the hand, those kind of things. And I'm agreeing with you. Yeah. Good point.
So I started writing down just some things of going, okay, if I had to boil it down as best as I can grasp it without, again, making it a program or, a list that you just check off, kind of thing.
Yeah.
I'm looking at 5 categories that are, 2 things that are paired. So 5 pairs, I guess is what I call it.
Sounds like a tablets, 2 tablets, 5 pairs.
Wait a minute.
Okay.
I did see a George Carlin comedy routine about 10 Commandments, and it was very irreverent.
But your point is, I'm interested to see, because off there are reflected in the other one. So talk to them. I like that idea. This is unscripted, and I like it. So continue.
It isn't based on the 10 Commandments by any means.
Right. But I get it. Go.
But there were longer lists, but as I started looking at them, I said, these 2 are really related, and these 2 are really related, and these 2 and these 2. Follower/listener, somebody who is
good terms. Yeah.
Obviously, to be a follower, you have to be listening to, whatever's being said, and you're kind of saying, okay, I'm interested. And, it shows a sense of interest, and of direction, in terms of movement. But because you can be a listener and not necessarily be a responder. I listen to talk radio all the time. It doesn't necessarily mean I believe in what they say.
Right.
But they have interest.
Right.
Joe Rogan, a lot of crappy stuff on his show, but some interesting things. And every once in a while, I do want to listen.
Yeah.
So follower, listener.
I like it.
Obedient/responsive. We were talking about.
Okay.
that.
Yeah. And thank you for coining those 2 together, because I'll bring that statement up in with Joe, because those 2 words go very hand in hand with those. So you're getting pluses for me on this one. Perfect. Yeah.
And there are nuances to both of those, but they're both in the same, camp. Of what that means in terms of I'm not just following, I'm actually beginning to change my mindset, beginning to change the way I live to, be in alignment with this person that I'm following.
Yeah.
And that's probably more inward, reflected in terms of what's going on there. Then you've got the outward side of it, which is the serve/give. That generosity of heart, generosity of resources.
Right.
In terms of how my life now begins to focus out toward others in the way that I live. The fourth one would be love/commitment, because we know that love, God's definition of
God's
love,
definition of love, right?
is not a feely thing. It's an action thing.
It's an action thing, and I like your choice of word there, because committed means that there's let's toss around covenant thoughts. In other words, that we'll use biblical terms here. We have because God brings the covenant in, but He constantly brings it back to a marriage analogy, because he goes from the individual to the corporate in this scenario, right? In this, so he starts with that thought process, and his version of love is a covenant commitment. So you don't have a covenant with pizza, or with NASCAR, or with trees. Okay, they're all, you can love them all. You can love nature, right? But you have covenant commitment with people and with God. Okay, and in that, what does that look like? Is a big difference, because what I see today when they use it for instance the marriage deals, because they're not covenant. They're legal, meaning they got a piece of paper, and now you don't even have to have that, So it's even less so on that, and we've diluted the word of that to where it's not. I'll go with marriage, but marriage and covenant are two totally different things. Covenant with this has that commitment, and with that, God's version of love has commitment tied to that. So
and then the final one would be communal/fruitful. It's that sense of, when God said to Adam and Eve, be fruitful and multiply, that comes out of a communal relationship. And so it's inherent that there's relation, connection, intimacy, but then there's product as a result of that. It's not just that. And with the nation of Israel, it was supposed to be the same way. And with Christians, it's supposed to be the same way. As our community is supposed to then impact the people around us. And whether we just create more of us or go out and impact others who then become more of us, there's a relationship there.
Okay, so we have this reap and sow scenario, right? And that sowing is fruitfulness. Okay, let's just walk it down the trail. That there's people that say, God will give me. I'm gonna commit to God, right? So now God's gonna provide for all your stuff. And God said, sow, work. Okay. Now, that said, that's also very much a communal activity. In other words, a farm isn't one guy with a bean. Okay.
Johnny Appleseed?
Yeah. You haven't seen. That's right. Jack. And it gets really big, the stalk. So, that it's the workers, the planters, the harvesters, the reapers, the harvesting, reaping, and then the sharing of that with the community, right? And you see, we'll go back to Joseph. It's going to be fruitful, so plant and grow. And let's get it in storage, because it's not. You get, the weather's really nice, because the weather's going to be really nice for 7 years. Because trust me, things got to grow. The weather's got to be nice, right? You're going to get regular rain. You get all this stuff's going on. Weather's going to be nice. Oh, it's great. It'll be fine. And then when it gets bad, then we have the problem. I don't know. There's a couple of Aesop's fables about that kind of stuff too, that whole thing. So, we have this thing where we do the one, God says, sow. And it's a communal thing. In other words, I'm agreeing with you. It's a community scenario, not just individual. And in that, then what are the expectations? In that. So what we do and how we do that corporately, it's going to be most evident, right? Because it's going to have a larger impact. individually speaking, oh yeah, you'll see that. And we have points in the Old Testament where we have things going on, and individual moments of fruitfulness show some amazing things, and then you have some brilliant stories that come from there. But there's a bunch when they corporately behave, things go very well. When they corporately misbehave, things don't go so well. And I believe our church in this point, I get discouraged sometimes when I look at the state of what is. When I was listening to that thing today, and that was just the 50. There was some 40,000, some ridiculous amount worldwide of all the different ones.
Yep.
He just brought big names up that you would have heard these, right? And you go, it's different. Back in the Old Testament, you had different gods. Follow on this one. Different gods, and they were big gods like sun, moon, the big gods that everybody. And then you had little, smaller, lesser gods that took care of this and that and the other thing, and they were communal and territorial. Okay? We transition out of when they're realizing that it's not. Science actually turns on and argues the science part. A lot of when people go, they get it's a God part. They just can't figure it out now with all that other stuff goes with it. But they get it's something other than scenario, right? So now the argument now isn't the multiple gods per se. It's you have God, and you have guys that don't want to believe in God. They want to believe that it all just happened, blah, 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 blah. That's fine.
Yeah.
Big deal. What we have is the largest group that supposedly follow this God, and where each is arguing which one's right. So it's different. Back then, it wasn't about following that God. Nobody else followed that God.
Right.
But those followers, and don't forget, they existed before Abraham, right? These were God followers before the children of Israel became and said, look, okay, now we're going to take it on a larger scale, right? We're going to take it to a big scale. And so you're going to be those priests, those servers. Now we're at the top of the scale, right? We're at that top. That's where I want you to be in this. And the fruitfulness that comes with it says, and you'll bless the nations. Yeah. The words that you've chosen are exactly what God had expected that corporate behavior to be.
Right.
And again, we are them, they are us, as I keep saying. That's what we're supposed to be. Okay. If we dare say that Israel blew it, and the church says this often, we dare hypocritical, pot calling the kettle black, you know, it's like it's almost scary that amount of that almost is, that's like lightning bolt stuff where I want to step to the side. When you say that, I just want to scooch over here because maybe I won't get quite as much of the impact when that hits. In how we need to respond to that setup, because as we get in the scripture, now our challenge is we're arguing we're 40,000 people arguing about the same God.
Yeah.
We're not debating this God. Jews, we're not debating the God. We're not debating the God. Now it's, well, how does he want us to follow? And then there's the debate. We're arguing amongst ourselves about the same thing that we poke and point at somebody else for. And I go, how hypocritical can we get? Which is why I brought up a couple times in the clubhouse chat is our hypocritical. How dare we think I can go that I even want to say, can we address racial reconciliation when we can't even reconcile how to follow our own God?
Right.
And you want me to fix this problem on top of that? Why would I even ask you? Much less can we. Why would I even ask you? Which is a sad state of affairs. And this is why I think, and we were just having this discussion before, is that I don't want to be the generation where God comes back. I don't want to be this one. Again, we argue about people praying about they want God to come, and I'm praying that he doesn't. Because I don't want to be part of that generation that said, that God said, enough.
Yeah.
The generation that Noah was in, and God said, enough. I don't want to be that generation. I don't want to be part of it. I want to do the best I can to hold it off, push it off as far as I can. May it not happen with me, and on my watch, in my game, right? As a referee, it's not going to happen in my game, because I'm not going to let it go to hell in a handbasket. Not in my game, and in this one, not in my lifetime.
Yeah.
Granted, we had to, but individual one thing, corporate's another, and how do we partner with people to further that corporate thought? And so I think with be a courtesan, that you got, I think you're tackling a good discussion. I'm interested to see what you guys flesh out from this. So yeah,
I am too.
I'd
We're
like to
gonna
be
spend
fly on the
all day-
wall or something for that. So
it's going to be an interesting conversation, and again, it's probably not the first pair of people that have wrestled through this,
right,
nor will it be the last.
no,
But hopefully, we'll come to a place where we feel like we're comfortable with this. Is where, if I were to be a follower, this is what I'd want my life to look like.
Yeah.
As a disciple, committed to Jesus Christ, kind of thing. So
take those take those 10, which which are scary. 10 commandment, meaning that they're mirrored. Take the 5, take the 5, and lay them over each other. And actually, I'll send you that clip if I think I've shared it with you, but I'm not sure that Aleph Beta does a deal on those 10, and Rabbi Foreman actually shows how they're this, and then and how they go and what the connections are. It's really cool, and I think what you have there, those 10/5 are actually intertwined on each other, and show a strong deal as to, hey, that's a pretty doggone good description. And then you have, like Paul's letter says, okay, what does responsive look like? What do those things look like? Right. And that's what he spends his time talking to the communities about. This is what it looks like. So look, and don't cause your brother to stumble. Okay? Which means know what the problems are.
Yeah.
Know what gives them a hang up, and know, hey, I cannot do that for you. That's fine. Because you're more important. So I don't fight the right game. I'm like, you're more important, and our relationship is more important than that. And how do we work through all that stuff? Which is big to me. So yeah.
Yep.
I love it.
Good stuff.
Okay. It's our time, yeah?
Yep.
So I hope people, as we've seen this, that we've had the points. We'll take those points, and I'll put them in the description. We'll add them to the description below, and then we'll use those to launch off some other discussion later on. I guarantee we will, because those are some good topic points. Because I might actually have some other guests come in and say, "Hey, here's a good launch point. Let's use these and do the piece." So we'll play it from there. So we'll take that list, put it in the description. So any last thoughts?
No, I think we did a good job of covering it, and we'll see in terms of the 30th whether it ends up being Joe or me. We'll see, and then I'll be gone from this for a while. But you and I will do our Renew series, and hopefully you'll be able to.
We'll get that rolling. That'll be fun. And by the way, we do red string is red, the Dusty Feet's green, and Renew is going to be blue and yellow.
Oh, there we go.
Because Jimmy picked the colors, and they look really cool. So, and trust me, we have a logo picked out, and we have a little intro played out, and it's really cool, isn't it?
We just have no content. We'll get there.
We'll get there. It's a pretty, something, but
it'll be well packaged.
That's it. So that's what we'll do. We'll play, the first thing will be, here's the shell. Oh, hey, intro, video, clip, bye. And then you go, wasn't there supposed to be something in between? And you go, oh, yeah. That's what we're looking to fill in, all the stuff in between. And that's really what life is, right? Life's the fill-in between all the events, in between our life and our death, right? Yeah. In between major milestones, children born, that kind of stuff. Look at us. We're old dudes. There was a time where I thought Jesus would come and I'd never make it out of junior high school. That's honest truth. Hal Lindsey, late great planet Earth, that's coming back. We got grandkids, and it's boggling to me. So, and wives that love us in spite of this. Yeah,
I don't know why.
yeah. So, okay. So, where am I? That's where I'm at. Okay. So, we'll figure out who the guest is going to be on the 30th. Reminder, I'm not going to be here next week because it's Sukkot. I'm going to be enjoying some time with the folks at the Vine, and I'm very excited about that. And this time, instead of a poem, it's more of a sharing. There was a lady, and she did a post, and it's spoken, the picture was of her dog. And her dog is looking at her. It's a cute picture. I didn't keep the picture, I just kept the post. But it was written third person that the dog is responding to her. But I thought it was an interesting point to say. So here was the quote. Read the Bible to me, Mama. Speak God's words. I like the tone of voice you have when you read it to me. Your anxiety fades when you read it. I know. I can sense it. I'm happy when you are. Read the Bible to me, Mama. Maddie Doodle, her dog. And all she had for her post, she called shows Tammy, follower of Jesus Christ. So I suggest that you read it. But you can read it out loud or get an audio and listen to it. It's amazing what it'll do to you when you hear it. You might want to... Robert Alter's book. Robert Alter's latest work is a translation of the Hebrew Bible. And it was written and translated specifically to catch the lyrical nuances. In other words, the cadence. So when you hear it, it takes on more. And it's brilliant to listen to. And I encourage anybody to listen to it. Speak the Bible to me, Mama. Speak God's words. So with that, I hope you have a wonderful week. And for Sukkot coming up, for those that do Sukkot, enjoy Sukkot. And thanks for being with us tonight on the Dusty Feet.